Last year, NFL free agency and trades changed everything for fantasy and dynasty football. We've got the biggest stars all now in new places. So we're going to rank these offseason moves and break down their impact for your rosters. Dave, do you find yourself making a lot of dynasty trades or changing your fantasy rankings a lot based on offseason moves like what we've seen so far?
Absolutely. This is one of the best times to trade. My favorite thing to do is kind of keep an ear to the street, see what everybody else is doing. And when I see everybody
What are you,
unanimously
a
saying,
1950s detective? Keep your ear to the
hey, keep my
street.
ear to the street, see?
Yeah.
Yeah. But when everybody's saying to do one thing, like when everybody's saying sell this player, like right now, everybody's saying sell Justin Fields, sell Justin Fields, sell Justin Fields. I think I might want to go buy some Justin Fields. If everybody's selling, he's going to be so cheap. Why not go out and get it for cheap? We're probably looking at a QB1 for at least this season. And who knows what could happen beyond there. So, same thing I see everybody saying, oh, Najee Harris, $5 million deal. And, it's only a 1 year deal. Sell Najee Harris. I'll buy Najee Harris because he's probably going to be an RB1. And if everybody is saying to do one thing, go out and do the opposite. You got to trust your long term process. Don't be overreactive to these free agency moves.
Well, now we're going to talk about all of our overreactions to these free agency moves. That's a good segue, huh?
How about it?
All right. So, what we did was we listed a bunch of the biggest moves in not only free agency, but the NFL trades that have happened. And so, what we're doing is Dave and I, we gave these a rating on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being best fantasy value for these players and the impact that it's going to have on their fantasy value, and 1 being the lowest. So, what we're going to do is our plan here is to go through the top 16. We're going to try to get through those. We might give you more, we might give you less. We'll see how the time works out. Dave and I do tend to get a little long winded, but let's start at the beginning here, Dave. At number 1, we've got Devontae Adams. Why now?
Huge.
He's going to be playing for the Rams. Big free agent deal after he gets cut by the Jets. I mean, not big, but 2 years, 44 million at his age, I would say is still a pretty big deal considering the team is ready to move on from Cooper Kupp. They've said that they're going to be cutting him at the start of the new league season, which is technically today, Wednesday, March 12th,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
He's getting cut today. So yeah, I
We're
mean,
recording in the morning, still got a couple of hours, but yeah.
yeah. Yeah, which by the way, if someone gets signed after we record this, like obviously we just missed it, guys. It just happened while we were recording. But Devontae
I don't
Adams,
think
this one,
Aaron Rodgers is signed for like 3 more weeks. He's gotta go
he
cover
likes the
himself
attention.
in venomous toad oil and bury himself in a hole or whatever he does this time of year.
God, what if
Sorry.
Aaron Rodgers? No, never mind. I'm just gonna leave that alone. Devontae Adams. I think
Yeah.
this is a great move for him. I rated this a 10. I think this is huge. I think the Rams could not have asked for a better player. I do not think that Devontae Adams could have asked for a better landing spot in a Sean McVay offense with Matt Stafford. He's basically going to be jumping into that Cooper Kupp role. Wide receiver 13 points per game last year.
Mhm.
And he did this all while sharing the field with big time playmakers. I mean, he produced with Brock Bowers in Las Vegas, Garrett Wilson in New York, and he was still a top 15 fantasy wide receiver. Yeah. And I think kind of just run it back again as a top 15 fantasy wide receiver. I know the age concern might be there, but this offense just gives him such a good injection of life for fantasy.
Yeah, I think, my actionable spin on this is going by Puka Nacua because I think that people are gonna be a little
Mm,
bit nervous about Puka Nacua, and I'll agree. I mean, I had Puka Nacua as my wide receiver 2 going into the 2025 season behind only Jamar Chase because we got word that Cooper Kupp was probably gonna be gone. Now with Devontae Adams there, Devontae Adams immediately is taking 30% of the targets for himself. He might be getting up there in age, and I understand in Dynasty having some trepidation with a guy like that who does have that age cliff looming, but right now Devontae Adams is still a top 5 receiver in the league. I mean, he has not lost any of his burst or his
based on talent.
explosiveness based on talent, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, talking dynasty value, of course not, but what he can do right now, he's getting up there, but he's not showing any signs of decline. He's still the same player that he was, and I think he is a much more explosive version of Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp has the nuance to his route running and is able to find the soft spot in his zones. Devontae Adams can do all that as well, but he's also got more strength and explosiveness that Cooper Kupp doesn't have. So this is a big win in my opinion for the Los Angeles Rams. It helps them a bunch. It helps Matthew Stafford. I think if you had to put one loser from this transaction, it's Puka Nacua. He probably falls from my wide receiver 2 to my wide receiver 4 or 5. But long term, we know Puka Nacua is still going to be great. So I'm not concerned at all in Dynasty. If people are worried in Dynasty, I'm going out and trying to buy Puka Nacua for cheap.
I was gonna say, like, having him get dropped down a couple spots, like wide receiver 4 or 5 for Puka Nacua. If anything, I think that feels just right. Like, it's such a good value to go and get him now because you're going to be getting top value from a guy like he's gonna get his targets, he's gonna get his receptions, like, it's gonna keep happening, but now that price point is just a little bit lower. It's like it's I'm buying a house right now, and it's the same house no matter what, and I keep getting the price a little bit lower every single time. Like, that's just exactly how I wanna be with these players. So Puka Nacua, that makes me happy there.
And this
Uh,
doesn't mean Puka Nacua is like done for 2025. It just means that I
no!
prefer Justin Jefferson ahead of him. Like it's I'm not saying that this is bad for Puka Nacua. He's still a round one pick. Just goes from being second or third overall to maybe fourth or fifth overall.
Yeah, I think what it does is it changes what you think the range of outcomes could be, right? Like maybe that range of outcomes isn't as high, but we know we've got a really strong floor with him. All right, next guy on here. This one is interesting, and I love the way that this has been talked about. DK Metcalf getting traded to the Steelers, and our guys over at the Ringer were talking about this, and Craig Horlbeck, who's a Steelers fan, says, "You know what? This is just cool. The Steelers never do anything cool." And it is like this is very out of the norm for the Steelers to go out and trade for a player to give them a big contract. And there's all the jokes being made right now about how like DK Metcalf and George Pickens. There's odds on who's going to be the first one to throw a punch and how this is going to end up. Dave, you are way more excited on DK Metcalf than I am, so I want to let you have the floor first here to talk about it because you ranked this a 10 on your rating here. So talk why are you so excited about DK Metcalf's fantasy value in the Steelers?
Maybe I misunderstood the assignment. I'm looking at the whole scope of this in general, that
Okay.
the Seahawks are also getting a second round pick. I think this was also the first domino that kind of fell when it seemed like the Seahawks were just going into this full blown rebuild. Well, they actually traded Geno Smith beforehand, but,
Mhm.
getting rid of Geno Smith, then getting rid of DK Metcalf. This is just the Seahawks really trying to reinvent their team, which I'm excited about. As far as DK Metcalf, though, I mean, the writing's been on the wall for years, it seems like, with Pittsburgh. Like, every single time there's been a big name free agent wide receiver or somebody out there who has been demanding a trade, it seems like they were always tied to Pittsburgh. They wanted to, they were front runners in the Brandon Ayuk drama last year, and now DK Metcalf this year. It seems like they've been sitting on this money and they've been waiting to spend it, and now they finally can. No, I'm a little bit lower on DK Metcalf than I think a lot of other people are. He has developed into a better receiver over the years, but being that size and still struggling with contested catches really does put a cap on his ceiling. They can get him in space. He's got the vertical balls. Now he's able to work across the middle of the field a little bit better, but still struggles with contested catches. Not crazy about that. I think what this indicates for me more than anything else is that they're going to move on from George Pickens. I wouldn't be surprised to see him on the trade block, traded very soon. There are some overlapping skill sets there, but I still think if you put DK Metcalf on one side and George Pickens on the other, it's not a bad problem to have. You've got two wide receivers, and George Pickens can excel in the red zone and with contested catches a little bit better than DK Metcalf. So overall, I think this is good for Pittsburgh. Like Craig said, they did something cool, they did something fun.
Right.
We just need to see who the quarterback is going to be. But if they do decide to go back to the well with Russ Wilson, whew, DK Metcalf and George Pickens, those are two wide receivers that fit in very well with Russ Wilson's play style.
Yeah, it almost feels like they've set themselves up for Russ Wilson to come back because Aaron Rodgers is such a timing based quarterback.
Yes.
The players, the wide receivers he has to be around have to be really good route
Oh, he'd
runners.
be
And
chewing out George Pickens by week
oh,
2.
yeah, and like that's dude, this is like watching your friend get into a very, very toxic relationship. We're gonna say that the Steelers are a friend here. And the idea that the Steelers are even entertaining the idea of putting George Pickens, DK Metcalf, and Aaron Rodgers in a room together is just this is where you tell your buddy, like, hey man, you know what? Maybe we sit the next couple plays out, take a lap, get a breather. I don't know that I love this. Like I
You
DK
know
Metcalf
who
was
else
the
works
wide receiver.
besides Russ, besides Rodgers? I'm gonna say it.
Oh God.
Jameis Winston with this wide receiver
I'd
duo? Are
love
you
it.
kidding
I'd
me?
love it.
Yeah.
I would love it.
Mhm.
Oh, Dave, it's yeah, pants
Jameis
off.
might go 40 and 40 this year with those 2 guys.
50 and 50, who knows? Just keep upping it. Yeah, man, like the DK Metcalf thing, I think is interesting because he is such a good player. He's still young. I thought DK Metcalf would be pushing like 29,
25, I
30.
wanna say,
He's
right?
26, I
26,
think.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's still super young. He came into the league when he was like 20, but he was wide receiver
27.
35. He's 27. Okay. We're both still super wrong. But he was wide receiver 35 in points per game last year. this is the thing for me on
He
an
was hurt
offense
though.
where
He had that
yeah,
MCL injury. Like his
I know.
he was doing much better before the injury last year.
Yeah, but so it's not like DK has ever been a big target hog though.
Mhm,
Even last year, it was 7 targets per game. In years prior to that, it was never ever close to double digits or what we've seen with other big time fantasy stars. DK always wins off of big plays and touchdowns. Now, I think honestly, the saving grace for DK Metcalf and the Steelers is if Russ comes back and they just
mhm.
run it back, same quarterback, do their thing now with DK and be able to pass the ball a little bit better than before and have Jalen Warren back there as a running back that can kind of do it all. I mean, they went out and signed Kenneth Gainwell as well. Like, this is a team that seems like they're leaning a bit more into the pass than they ever have before. But the problem here is I just don't know that either of these two wide receivers are going to have a lot of fantasy value. Everything to me for DK seems to hinge on whether or not George Pickens gets traded away. And I don't love that. I don't love that. I don't love the discount that I mean, the discount on DK is fine. I just don't know that I even want to take that discount. Are
Yeah.
you looking at maybe trading for a George Pickens or you're just kind of staying
Oh,
away from
no.
these guys? Okay.
No, I'm staying far away from George Pickens because if that does happen where he gets traded out of Pittsburgh, we've seen what happens to wide receivers after they get traded out of Pittsburgh. And I don't want George Pickens. I don't want to be buying a guy who's going to go the same route as Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool and Antonio Brown and all these other guys who I don't know how he does it. But Mike Tomlin gets these problematic wide receivers to play good football and then basically cast them aside when he can't do anymore. And if they are choosing to move on from George Pickens, you got to think the NFL's learned their lesson, right? Like if Omar Khan calls and says, "Hey, you want George Pickens?" You got to imagine most GMs are just slamming the phone on him, right?
I don't think any yeah, I don't know
Maybe.
if there is an NFL team that really wants George Pitt. Like the only thing I can think of. No, and even that just doesn't seem right. Like maybe he ends up in a place like Tennessee that needs
Mm,
another wide receiver, and like even then, it's like, no, I don't see any of these teams taking a risk with him. I actually think we're going to have Pickens and DK together in Pittsburgh. I think Aaron Rodgers ends up in New York. It's easy for him to just stay
the
there playing with the
Giants, yeah.
Giants and Malik Neighbors and kind of run it back, same stupid thing he did last year. And then I think we're going to end up with Russ in Pittsburgh with these two wide receivers.
Or
And I
Jameis.
think that's or Jameis. Or Jameis.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Let's go to the next player on here. And this is the last player in this top tier, and it's T. Higgins. It's just more of the status quo. And
Okay.
I'm good with that. Like it makes me very happy. I rated this a 9 out of 10. Dave, you rated it a 9 out of 10. I know it's just a franchise tag, so it's not a long-term thing, but wide receiver 3 in points per game last year, T. Higgins in half PPR. And it's just I'm not necessarily thinking that he's going to come back and be a top 5 wide receiver again next year. We've got to see that he can stay healthy the full year. We've got to see that the Bengals offense can produce the way that they have in the past. But this to me is just more of the same. I don't think there's much to even talk about with T. Higgins.
I think the one thing to keep an eye on is potentially a trade. You know, they've got him on that franchise tag right now, and there's a lot of teams looking for T. Higgins. For whatever reason, they've made it pretty apparent that they don't want to sign T. Higgins to a long term deal. So I just published a mock draft on Monday, which hilariously outdated already. About half of the picks that I made are already, have been filled via free agency. But one pick that I had in there that I think still is very much so in play is the Cincinnati Bengals drafting Matthew Golden in round one.
Mhm.
And after they get Matthew Golden, then maybe putting T. Higgins out there. So maybe we see a draft day trade, maybe a trade immediately after the draft. There's a handful of receivers in this draft that I think could work well in the Bengals offense. And maybe they just want to see if they can get one of those guys before they trade T. Higgins. So that's something I think maybe keep an eye on. If they can get a Matthew Golden or maybe if Ted McMillan falls to them in round one, and then after they draft that guy, then they'd have a little bit more confidence in trading T. Higgins to Carolina or Los Angeles or one of these other options out there. So I think that's really the only thing to watch. But if T. Higgins does return, you know what you're getting. You're getting a guy who is a high end wide receiver too with week winning upside in this offense.
So let's say this. Let's say we've got we've got the Bengals at pick 17.
Hmm.
We've got the Panthers at pick 8.
Hmm.
Let's say the Bengals are trading T. Higgins so that they can move up to pick 8. And let's say they get a little something else in there. Fourth round pick, fifth round pick, something else. Is that a deal that you would like for T. Higgins or for the Bengals?
I'd love it for T. Higgins. I think the Bengals might be a little bit smarter to stay put and draft Ted McMillan, a guy with a very similar archetype to T. Higgins, who is going to be on a much cheaper, longer contract than T. Higgins would be. Because that's the other thing. If you are trading for T. Higgins, then you immediately have to give him what's probably a 4 year, 120 to
Right.
$150 million contract. With Ted McMillan, if you draft him instead, you're looking at a player with a similar range of outcomes for much cheaper. So I don't know if the Bengal or if the Panthers would be interested in trading back, but I think that the Bengals are very much so in play to draft a first round wide receiver, and then they'll deal with T. Higgins after.
See, I've never liked that because to me, as an NFL franchise, you lose your leverage there. You kind of show your cards of like, well, we drafted a wide receiver and we really don't need this guy or want this guy. Now, what are you all willing to give us? I think the Titans tried to pull it off as best as they could with AJ Brown, where they almost did
Right.
it simultaneously,
Yeah.
and it still worked out really terribly for them. So I don't know, man. I actually think like unless since he's got to get a really good offer for T
And
Higgins,
and if they don't, I mean, then they've just got an
just keep him.
embarrassment of riches. Then they have
Yeah.
then you got Joe Burrow thrown to Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Matthew Golden. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, the
Not a bad
Bengals
problem to
fans
have.
I can hear the Bengals fans screaming at us like, "Stop talking about wide receivers. Just we need players on the defensive line." Yeah,
Yeah.
we got you guys.
Lost Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard. It's been a tough offseason so far.
Yeah, if they draft Matthew Golden and don't get a defensive lineman, the screams will be heard all the way down here in Florida. All right, next tier, going down to tier 2, player number 4 on this list, Aaron Jones, running back for the Minnesota Vikings, resigns 2-year, $20 million deal. I give this a 9 out of 10, not because I think that Aaron Jones' fantasy value goes up, but I think it kind of just stays the same. He's a top 20 fantasy running back, and I don't think there's a lot of running backs that you can look at with ultimate certainty. And the team's offensive line is well improved now through free agency. And the commitment to JJ McCarthy here as the starting quarterback makes me feel like the Vikings are going to rely heavily on not just running the ball, but getting the ball into the hands of Aaron Jones as many times and in as many creative ways as possible. It's not like they went out there and started signing more running backs or anything else. They really just beefed up the front of the offensive line there. They go and re-sign Aaron Jones almost immediately to a 2-year deal. It's not one of those 1 year, 9 million things. So this seems like a really big commitment to the run game and to Aaron Jones specifically.
And Aaron Jones last year was very quietly a workhorse. I don't think a lot of people realize it's
Yeah.
sixth in the league in weighted opportunities. And that, puts a heavier value on red zone and pass catching. So 14th in opportunities, sure, but sixth in weighted opportunities. So he's still getting a lot of those high value touches in a good offense. I think the downside here is that, we haven't seen much from JJ McCarthy yet. We haven't seen anything from JJ McCarthy in the NFL field. It's been over a year since he's played real football. Still young, still inexperienced, and I know I have a lot of faith in Kevin O'Connell. I don't think JJ McCarthy is going to be bad, but that is always the risk with a young quarterback coming in to get his first starts. He could just be terrible, and if he's terrible, then Justin Jefferson is going to struggle a little bit, and Aaron Jones isn't going to get the same opportunity he got last year behind MVP level play from Sam Darnold. So that's the potential risk here with Aaron Jones. Is we know we're already looking at him getting pretty close to that expiration date. Already 30 years old, under contract for the next 2 years. One bad season from JJ McCarthy, and then all of a sudden Aaron Jones basically has no value at all. But I think that if you're a contender and you need help at the RB spot, you need looking for a really cheap RB2, you could probably go out and get Aaron Jones for a third round pick right now.
Yeah, it's contenders and old running backs go together like lamb and tuna fish. We love it. We love it. Next on here, number 5, Justin Fields. This is the guy we mentioned earlier, Dave, that you talk about as a guy that you'd go out and buy right now. And it seems like a lot of people are thinking of selling him, which is so crazy because for years, Justin Fields has been the guy that's been in all the dynasty trade talks. And everyone uses Justin Fields as the example of look at how much value that running quarterbacks retain year over year over year. And now he has a starting gig in New York with his
Mm.
former college teammate. I mean, how bad could it possibly be? He was quarterback 7 in fantasy through his 7 starts last year with the Steelers. Like, this is a guy who just on the rushing alone is going to be a top 10 fantasy quarterback. You've got a players coach in Aaron Glenn, who's coming over from Detroit with his former passing coordinator in Detroit now as the offensive coordinator. It seems like there's probably going to be a commitment to running the ball as well, which is going to open things up for Justin Fields even more. And I wouldn't be surprised, Dave, if they start using Garrett Wilson a little bit like Amon-Ra St. Brown, where they're just moving him around all over in the field, get him into the slot, put him on the outside, get him on some end arounds. Like there's so many different things they can do. I'm not saying this Jets offense is going to be crazy or light it up or make the playoffs, but Justin Fields' fantasy value is still very much alive and probably better than it's been in years at this point. I got to say.
Yeah, and the downside with Justin Fields, we don't know what he's going to be doing in 2026 or beyond. But you look at this contract, people see the 2 year, $40 million, and they think, oh, Justin Fields is going to be the starter for the next 2 years. I don't see it that way at all. They guaranteed him $30 million, which basically means that this is a 1 year, $30 million deal. If things don't pan out, they could move on pretty easily after this year. But the reason he didn't want to re-sign with Pittsburgh is because they wanted a quarterback competition. Whether they were going to draft a guy or bring in Russell Wilson, they wouldn't commit to Justin Fields as the QB1. Shortly after that story comes out, we get news that he's signing with the New York Jets. So, kind of reading between the lines here, I'd imagine that the Jets have given him at least a commitment to play this full season. He's betting on himself, and he wanted a team that was willing to give him that opportunity. The Jets aren't anywhere near a win now team, so they can afford to put a fun, exciting young quarterback who's going to fill up the highlight reel in there. Let it play out for 17 games and see what happens. And if Justin Fields does well this year, then he's going to be on that same Sam Darnold trajectory that we just saw, where one good year is enough for you to go out and get a multi-year, $100+ million contract, in which case all of a sudden he's right back to a first-round startup value in Dynasty. So I think the range of outcomes for Justin Fields after this year is huge, and you can still get him for relatively cheap. So I think it's worth the risk now to go out and get Justin Fields, because you could probably get him for an early second-round pick. And if things pan out, and you're looking at a multi-year starter with top 5 quarterback upside every single year he plays, that's a guy I want on my dynasty rosters.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, by the way, Dave, if the Jets do draft a quarterback in like the third or fourth round, but not someone who's coming in to directly compete with Fields for the starting job. Like I could
Jalen
see them
Milrow.
drafting. Oh, who?
Jalen Milrow. That would be a
I
great guy
mean,
to sit behind Justin Fields for a couple of years.
potentially, yeah. Like I could see like a Tyler Shug, a Quinn Ewer, basically anyone that's in that tier of quarterbacks. Let him come in and sit for a year, learn a little bit, see how it goes, and then if Justin Fields is absolutely face planting, you give the kid a try, and then you just run it back next year and and the next draft and see if you can get yourself a top quarterback. I mean, it doesn't. This is not going to be an overnight change for the Jets. It's going to take some time.
Right.
All right, next on here at number 6, Chris Godwin, wide receiver for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I talked about him a little bit the other day in the Football Guys shorts that we have, and Chris Godwin to me just feels like he's probably going to end up being a fantasy steal based on his current ADP now in best ball drafts. He's going to like wide receiver 35. And I think a lot of it was just uncertainty of where he's going, and that'll adjust, but I don't know how much it's going to adjust. I still think he's probably going to get drafted as like a low end wide receiver 2. And we've seen the chemistry is there between he and Baker Mayfield. Godwin was leading the NFL in catches before he got hurt in week 7, second in the league in yards, 5th in touchdowns. He may not come back as a top 10 wide receiver like he was last year, but I think we're looking at a guy who's probably in that top 15, top 20 fantasy wide receiver range. And he's probably going to be getting drafted way beyond that simply because of the injury concerns, the age concerns, Jalen McMillan coming up. But I actually just really like this re-sign. I think that Chris Godwin retained most of his value by just staying in Tampa.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that his ADP is going to creep up. I think he's probably going to be getting drafted inside the top 15. I'd be shocked if he's getting drafted outside of the top 20 wide receivers by the time this kind of regulates or after free agency, because what we saw last year was that he was a top 5 wide receiver when he was on the field. I mean, he is one of the most talented, aggressive guys after the catch. He's a perfect complement to Mike Evans. Yeah, I'm interested to see where the ADP is going to fall, but assuming he is not inside of the top 15, I mean, I'm going to have him ranked inside my top 15. So I'm going to be drafting him everywhere if his value is below that. And he's one of those guys, it feels like I've been saying this for 4 years in dynasty communities, just continues getting undervalued. I remember doing a dynasty startup draft in the 2022 offseason, and I got Chris Godwin in round 8. That was years ago, and he's just been giving us consistent high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1 production since then, and now he's even cheaper than he was. Chris Godwin is just one of my favorite football players, and I think it's really cool that Tampa Bay has now Godwin and Evans both under contract. It's very realistic to think that both of these guys retire as Bucks, so shout out to the Bucks for drafting and developing guys that could potentially retire as future Hall of Famers on this team.
Yeah, I love it, and what I want to say is I think that Chris Godwin ends up being one of those guys who's just he's boring good, which
Yeah.
is like every year we see these players that are boring good just sort of fall down in ADP and fall down in ranks because we're always excited by the new hotness when a rookie shows up. Like
Peak,
it's not
right?
going to
Like he's just been a boring, consistent guy since 2018.
yeah. Yeah, and we've got a lot of those. We've got a lot of those, but it won't shock me if we get into fantasy draft season and you've got the Matthew Goldens and Ted McMillans all going ahead of Chris Godwin, and we just keep running it back with the same mistakes of drafting rookies a little too early over just set veterans.
And
All right,
reports are also that Godwin took kind of a home team discount to go back to Tampa Bay, that there were other teams offering him more money, and he still
Patriots, I
went back
believe.
to Tampa. Yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of that, got to remember a few years back when Chris Godwin tore his ACL, there wasn't a ton of excitement for him on the free agency market after that ACL tear, and the Bucks brought him back then and gave him another chance, and he has bounced back to the same player he was pre-injury. So I think this maybe him going back on that home team discount is kind of a thank you for an extra chance after the torn ACL. Tampa Bay is just doing a great job. That front office really, really is doing a great job.
They're even going out there and dispelling rumors on Twitter. Did you see that?
That
When
was
someone
hilarious.
someone
Poor
reported
Joey
that the
Wright.
Bucks, yeah, someone reported that the Bucks were signing Samaje Perine, and Jason Light, the GM for the Bucks, is like, no,
No.
we're not. Retweeted it. I love it. All right, next guy on here, number 7, Najee Harris. Is now the running back for the Los Angeles Chargers, and he signed a 1-year, $9.25 million contract. Dave, we both kind of listed this as an 8 out of 10. Um, I think it's just tempered excitement. I think there was always going to be excitement for whatever running back ended up on the Los Angeles Chargers because of that run heavy approach. But I look at it this way. I think this is the most lateral move possible for Najee Harris, who ironically is not very good at lateral moves, but this is the
Heyo.
most uh, fantasy lateral move. Oh, hi, there's a puppy in the background, Dave. Your
Oh,
doggy's saying hi.
hey. Hey,
Adorable.
what's up, girl?
Hey.
Yeah, that's her.
We're back to Najee Harris really quick. Um, I don't see him being this guy who's going to be getting 20 touches per game. I think that's just something that we've kind of conned ourselves into, is that the Chargers are going to do that for someone, whether it was a rookie or a veteran. Last year, Dobbins was getting 15 carries per game and 2.9 targets per game. Najee Harris, exact same thing, 15 carries per game, 2.9 targets per game. Maybe there's more touchdown opportunities, but so much of that was just J.K. Dobbins being explosive and having big runs and making huge plays. I still kind of see Najee Harris below the RB20 range, probably somewhere as like RB 24, 23, something like that, just a low end RB2, which I think is super fair because I would not be surprised if the Chargers leave the NFL draft with a good rookie like an Omarion Hampton,
Oh, yeah.
or I mean, it's very Caleb Johnson, any one
Who I
of
had
these
in my
guys.
mock draft was Omari Hampton in round 1 of the Chargers, and I think this might pour a little water on that one, unfortunately. But it's only 1 year, so
We
maybe not.
think
Yeah.
We think, looking at you, Seahawks, ruining everyone's life with Ken Walker and Zach Charbonnet.
I will say, though, Najee Harris just feels like such a good fit for this offense, and
It is.
I'm gonna have a really spicy take here, Alfredo.
Oh God.
I don't think Najee Harris is that bad at football. I know he doesn't have like the super exciting efficiency metrics. He doesn't have the big breakaway runs and he doesn't have all that, but he's good at moving a pile and he's good at picking up the yards after contact. And when you look at a Greg Roman offense, that's what they want. They don't want a guy who's going to be ripping off. I mean, I'm sure they would like a guy who's scoring 80-yard touchdowns, but that's never really been like a big part of Greg Roman offense. You look at the guys who have found success in this offense. Najee Harris is kind of like a younger, better version of Gus Edwards, right? Like he does all the same things. He's a big physical guy who's going to wear defenses down throughout the game. He might not have the huge breakaway runs, but I still think this is a very good real life football fit. I think Najee Harris is going to flourish in this offense. I haven't finalized my rankings yet, but looking at the projected opportunity share right now, that's going to go Najee Harris's way behind this amazing offensive line that they've revamped here. You've still got, Justin Herbert, who's going to keep defenses honest. I think it's going to be pretty tough for me to keep Najee Harris outside of my top 20 running backs.
See, to me, this contract and the history of Harbaugh and Roman and using multiple running backs, this just screams
Fair.
to me exactly what you said, Dave. He's good at moving the pile. That's exactly what I think they're going to do with Najee. Is here is 13 to 15 carries per game, and we're just going to slam you into the backs of the guards and centers and keep running it up the middle. Also, we're going to go and draft a super explosive young running back that we think is going to help us keep things fresh. And so I think it's a good fit. Don't get me wrong. I don't know that we're going to get the usage that we want for fantasy. And that's why I still kind of remain lukewarm. It's funny. We sound like we're saying two very different things. We rated
We're
this
saying
the
the same thing.
exact
Yeah,
same,
right.
an 8 out of 10.
And I think that, if they go out and they draft an Omari and Hampton, Najee Harris is probably outside of my top 36 running backs at that point. But I think if they wait until day 3 and they add more of a complimentary guy, Najee Harris is like a Jalen Warren type of player. If they add maybe RJ Harvey, one of those guys who can be the big play guy that can come in on third down. And then we've got the complimentary option in Najee. There's going to be a lot of touchdown equity in this offense. It's still a good offense that can move down the field. So I think that's kind of the hope with Najee Harris is that you're going to get another 1,000-yard season. And maybe this year, playing in a better offense than he's played in years past, we might get lucky and see double-digit touchdowns as well.
Yeah, man. I'm looking at it right now and I'm just thinking, I cannot wait until the Chargers go and draft Travion Henderson in round 2 because and just do that
I'd
and
be
ruin
pretty
everyone's.
upset if my Bears don't get him, but yeah, it would make
Yeah.
sense.
Don't worry, they're gonna get Ashton Jinty round 1.
Uh,
All right, let's go down to the next tier here at number 8. We'll go a little faster with these guys. I don't think the impact is as big, but at 8, we've got Khalil Shakir, who he just re-signed with the Bills, 4-year, $53 million deal. And
woo!
you know what, Dave? We stood on our desks and we chanted and we championed for Khalil Shakir all offseason last year. And I love where we're at. I love this for us. I love this journey for you, Khalil Shakir. Get paid, my guy. This is awesome. This is awesome. I think we're going to see more of the same.
Yeah, I don't think his role's changing. You look at, we'll talk about it in a little bit. They added Josh Palmer, who is a guy that's kind of the field
No, we won't.
stretcher. Oh, all right, maybe we
We're
won't.
not we're not getting that far down the list.
But yeah, Khalil Shakir, I think that you look at how they've kind of built this offense over the years. They're always going to have these guys that want to get deep downfield and stretch and stress defenses vertically. Whether it's Gabe Davis or Mac Hollins or who else? Chase Claypool, they tried. There's been a lot of Marquez Valdez Scantling. They've always brought these guys in, but the one guy who has consistently been that guy that can win in the short and intermediate parts of the field, the guy who can make plays after the catch, is Khalil Shakir. We kind of talked about the dream is that he becomes the new Cole Beasley's in this offense, and that's kind of what he has become. He's just that reliable safety valve that Josh Allen looks to. So really, really happy for him.
Next guy on here, number 9, Christian Kirk gets traded to the Houston Texans. And this was after all the reports were coming out that the Jaguars were just going to release him. And I always think this is really it's funny from the outside, but it's got to be so disheartening as a player when you're about to get cut and some teams like, okay, we'll give up a 7th round pick to get this
That's
player
exactly
in
what
our
they did with
team.
Joe Mixon last year. Remember? The
Yeah,
Bengals cut Joe Mixon, and then the Texans were like, "Wait, we'll give you a 7th." And then this year, same exact thing with Christian Kirk. It's the Texans, the bottom feeders of the NFL.
but you know what this tells me though is like this is one of those few times where the trade and the actions don't necessarily correlate to the value of the player. Where we
Absolutely.
if we saw the Texans do this last year, we know that they're willing to use the player that they traded for a late round pick. And I think if anything, the Christian Kirk thing I think is very underrated. I rated this an 8 out of 10. Um, I think this is going to be a very underrated move. One of those it's going to be he's good boring, where he's going to be lining up in the slot, lining up outside. You've got Tank Dell recovering from his injury. Stephon Diggs is gone and still remains unsigned. Nico Collins, of course, is going to be Nico. But I think that there's going to need to be a guy underneath that CJ Stroud can depend on. And I don't know that Dalton Schultz does that enough for him, but Christian Kirk, I think, fits nicely into that Tank Dell, Stephon Diggs role. Maybe not as dynamic as those guys, but I think he fits nicely into that.
Yeah, I think he's very similar player to Tank Dell, and I think that what he lacks in some of the top speed, he can make up for in play strength. So I think this is probably a better fit for the Texans offense as a whole. Um, Christian Kirk can do a lot more than I think what people think he can do. In Jacksonville, he was very much so pigeonholed into this receiver where he was kind of the intermediate guy, catching balls across the middle of the field, hoping to make plays after the catch. But you look early in his career when he was in Arizona,
Deep guy.
he was lining up. Yeah, he was exclusively playing out wide and running nothing but vert routes in that air raid offense. So he's got a very well-rounded skill set, and it's just the two coaching staffs that have used him have kind of used him in very different ways, but maybe here they can use him a little bit more dynamically, keep defenses honest. He can play deep, he can play short. And the injury he suffered last year isn't one that's going to linger. He's not coming back from a devastating knee injury or anything like that. It's a broken collarbone. And once that collarbone heals, players can usually bounce back to the player they were pre-injury. So I'm very excited for Christian Kirk here. I think this is a great landing spot for him. Stephon Diggs isn't coming back. Tank Dell most likely isn't playing in 2025. This could be a really sneaky value where Christian Kirk could, behind Nico Collins, easily back into 100 plus targets.
Yeah, and there's sort of the sliding door effect of what happens with with all these players, and the ripple that I like from this. And we don't have him on our list, but Diami Brown going to the Jaguars, it may seem like nothing. I think there's some potential there for him. He was a highly touted prospect, and he started to come on at the end of the year last year for the Commanders. Him going into that Liam Cohen offense with really no
Yeah.
other receivers except for Brian Thomas. They lose Evan Ingram. They lose Christian Kirk. They don't really have much else. I wouldn't be surprised if we get to
Gabe
see a little.
Davis, this is the year. Just kidding.
Don't do that.
Just kidding.
Don't do that. You're better than that. Maybe you're not. I don't know.
No, I'm
All
not.
right, next one on here. You're like, no, I'm not. Number 10, Jordan Mason resigns with the 49ers, and it's not so much the money, but it is the tender in which they put on Jordan Mason. It was a second round tender,
Yeah.
right? That if any
Yeah.
team wanted to come and sign Jordan Mason, they would not only have to beat the financial offer given by the Niners, but give up a very high draft pick to get him.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't say that this is the kind of insurance policy you put on a player that you're okay losing. The Niners lost Elijah Mitchell. They've lost plenty of running backs over the years. Jordan Mason feels like a guy they really want to have and really utilize next year.
Yeah, I don't really know what to make of this. It's a big investment in Jordan Mason, and I think that surprised a lot of people. I did not see this
Yeah.
coming at all. Now they go into next year, still with Christian McCaffrey under contract. Isaac Guerrero still on his rookie year, and now bringing Jordan Mason back as well. I think this is one of those backfields where I just want to take the cheapest option. I see right now Christian McCaffrey is still getting drafted as an early second, and I really have concerns about a guy at his age bouncing back from an injury-ridden season. So I think when I'm in fantasy drafts this year, I'm just going to want to draft Jordan Mason late. And right now, Jordan Mason is going after Isaac Guerrero, and you saw that when both of those
Really?
guys were healthy, they did clearly value Jordan Mason ahead of Guerrero. I
Yeah.
expect that to flip flop now that the uncertainty is gone. Now that we know Mason is returning to San Francisco, but man, he looks so good in that offense last year. And he might lack a little bit of the pass catching upside. He's not going to be a clone of Christian McCaffrey out there, but he could still rip off the big plays. He can still score touchdowns. I think the biggest question mark here isn't the commitment in Jordan Mason or the cloudiness of the backfield. It's that the 49ers might just be really bad. I mean, that window, we talked about it last year, midseason, where it said the window for the 49ers is kind of slamming shut. And then you look at all of the players that they have lost in free agency. They've still got their core of Brock Purdy and George Kittle and Christian McCaffrey, but lost a lot of guys on the offensive line, lost a lot of their biggest playmakers on defense. It wouldn't be surprising if this 49ers team is just like a 4 or 6 win team this year. And that is the downside for the running backs.
I don't see how, as a team, you weren't making moves to either offload Christian McCaffrey or restructure the contract, open up some cap space for you, keep some of those offensive. I mean, losing Aaron Banks to the Packers, it's not like he's a
Yeah.
world beater, but this was a very good guard that was really helping them throughout the season. And it it's interesting because the investment in Jordan Mason has me questioning things, because if there was ever an offense where we're like, just throw any running back in there that kind of has the skill set and it worked, it's the Niners. So the fact that they've been so stingy with their running back room, and we have to keep these certain players, McCaffrey, Mason. I mean, Grindo's staying there no matter what, but then missing out on so many of these other necessary pieces, cornerstones. They go out and they're signing Demarcus Robinson. Like they start to add. I don't get it. I don't know that I quite understand what their offseason is. So I think you're right. I think the crash out. Oh my gosh, that needs to be an episode, by the way, ASAP. Like a crash out episode of which teams are crashing out the worst. I'm in on that. Let us know in the comments what you think. Crash out episode coming soon. All right. Next one here, number 11. Oh, we can do this. You know what? 11 and 12. Geno Smith and Sam Darnold.
Yeah.
Because this is another one of these
Same, but
sliding door,
different.
same, but different. Sliding door quarterbacks, both former Jets quarterbacks, by the way, BT Dubs. Um, this is interesting. I was very surprised to see that there was a trade where Geno Smith was going to the Raiders, and not so surprised when Sam Darnold signed with the Seahawks. But I think the Seahawks idea here is they kind of wanted maybe a higher ceiling with a young guy that could be the franchise guy going forward. It kind of feels like they're doing the opposite of what everyone says with the market. They're not buying the dip, like they're buying at the absolute peak of the Sam Darnold stock. And I don't quite understand it. This is another team that has made a lot of weird moves where they seem like they're blowing it up, but then they're like, let's go spend a bunch of money on Darnold. And then same thing with the Raiders. They're not competing, yet they're out here trading high draft picks for a quarterback in his mid 30s. Like I don't understand either of these moves. I think they're both really bad moves.
Uh, I'm a little bit more optimistic about these moves, Alfredo, and I think that last year we saw the Raiders. They do have a pretty good team. Jacoby Myers, very underrated wide receiver. Brock Bowers, maybe the most versatile, just one of the best weapons you could have in football right now. And I think that the biggest problem that they had was just terrible quarterback play from the Frankenstein quarterback room they put together, Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell and Jimmy Garoppolo and whoever else was there. So I think now getting, league average quarterback play from Geno Smith, who still is on a relatively team friendly deal, could help them out a little bit. There have been reports that they want Geno Smith to get a long term extension and they kind of envision him to be the quarterback of the future. I don't know if I'm buying that. I think he's already 34, 35 years old. They might give him a 2-year deal or something like that. But I think that Geno Smith is the perfect bridge quarterback for them to still go out and draft Shador Sanders. Very similar
Sure.
play styles. And I think that that just makes so much sense for them to give Geno Smith, an extra 2 years, bring in Shador Sanders, and then kind of make that transition over the next couple of seasons.
So the one thing I don't like is that Geno Smith has always been a good push the ball downfield quarterback, and that's not exactly the kind of
Yeah.
offense we get with Chip Kelly. It's a very spread out offense, make the quick reads, RPOs, stuff like that. So I'm I'm intrigued by it. I still think you're right about the Shador thing. I just I think it becomes less and less likely that you go out and put a third round pick into Geno and then your first round pick into Shador, and then you still really don't have much else around you. I don't know if the Raiders do that, especially under a new coach. It seems like with Pete Carroll, they want to compete now and not go out and start this over with a rookie quarterback. So um,
If I could just get on my
I'm confused by it.
soapbox
Do
for a
it.
quick second about NFL contracts, because I remember saying this last year and nobody wanted to hear it. Everybody sees that Kirk Cousins goes out 4 years, $180 million, and everyone's like, "Oh my goodness, Kirk Cousins, one of the highest paid quarterbacks in NFL history." But when you look at the guaranteed money, $50 million, that tells me it's a 2-year, $50 million deal that they could easily
Right.
move on from, and that's why they went out and they drafted Michael Penix. And now we're seeing this all over again right now. I see everybody saying, "Oh my goodness, look at this, Sam Darnold, 3 years, $100 million." $55 million guaranteed. It's a 2-year
Hmm.
deal. That's what that
Yeah.
is. They're going to be able to move on after 2 years if things don't work out, and they only have to eat $55 million. It's not this, people get so enamored by the big money. It reminds me, I learned this lesson 15 years ago with Donovan McNabb when he signed his $98 million contract with Washington and ended up collecting 14 million of it. That was when I realized guaranteed money is all that matters. So I see a lot of people looking at the 2-year $40 million for Justin Fields and the 3-year $100 million for Sam Darnold. It doesn't mean what you think it means. Sam Darnold got a 2-year, $55 million contract. They're basically giving him 1 year to show out. If he doesn't make that big step forward this year, they can replace him next year and they can move on after the 2026 season for not a lot of money. That's all I got to say about that.
It would be the most Seahawks thing ever for them to draft Jackson Dart in the first round.
It would make a
But
lot of
they're doing
sense. I mean, it does kind of work. And I want to say Sam Darnold, I think this is cool for him too, because still one of the most polarizing players out there. We all saw the disaster of a quarterback he was to start his career. And then we see him playing literally MVP level football last year. And still his doubters are saying, oh, well, Kevin O'Connell, Justin Jefferson, yada, yada, yada. But I think that now he is going to finally have an opportunity to change the public perception of him for better or worse. If he goes out and plays terribly, well, then congrats, haters. You really nailed that one. But if he goes out and plays good football on this Seattle team, then he goes out and then he gets that mega 200+ million deal. So Sam Darnold bet on himself by going to Seattle. And I don't know. My immediate gut reaction was that it was kind of gross. But the more I look at it, the Seahawks have a ton of draft capital. They've got a first, they've got 2 seconds, they've got 2 thirds, they've got 5 picks on day 3. They're set up to really address a lot of those weaknesses, and they could be a sneaky team in a pretty weak NFC West.
Yeah, I don't know where else Sam Darnold was going to go. I'm not gonna lie, I don't see him. I don't see him panning out again in New York, going to the Jets,
Oh,
or
that would
not
have
the
been
Jets.
fun
Sorry,
though.
yeah, that would have been hilarious. The Giants either. Like,
Yeah.
don't see that. Raiders obviously get Geno. It kind of seemed like, and the Steelers, that wasn't going to happen either. It kind of seemed like this was almost the only place for him to go. It'll be interesting. I think the Seahawks are probably going to be pretty bad next year.
JSN might see 180 targets next year, by the way. So I
280.
don't
Yeah.
I don't think you could buy high enough on JSN. I mean,
Yeah.
he is going to have himself a really fun season. I think my favorite tweet throughout this entire free agency cycle. I don't know if you saw this one yesterday. Somebody goes, "I'm going back and I'm watching the Sam Darnold film from last year, and this number 18 guy is pretty good." Justin Jefferson.
Yeah.
Sorry. All
I,
right.
I'm not, I had a moment there. I'm like, what team was Darnold on last year? Because I was just like, they
Yeah.
were all flying through my head
Yeah.
at the same
Just
time.
kind of the joke
Yeah.
that Justin Jefferson. I mean, I will say, like, it doesn't get much easier for Sam Darnold than last year. Very good offensive
Right.
line, Aaron Jones in the backfield, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson. There was a stretch of games where over 90% of the targets in Minnesota were going to those four players. Like, it's not like Darnold was out here running a very competent, balanced offense. He was just forcing the ball to his best playmakers. And now going to Seattle, it's going to be a little bit different when you got JSN and the number two guy behind him is Noah Fant.
Yuck. Yuck. Yeah, that's also that's a fear of mine. The offensive line there is just not good in Seattle.
Yeah.
So
They
not
need to
not
hit on a
excited
lot
about
of draft picks this year. I mean, this is
it. A ton.
this draft is really going to make or break the future for Seattle.
All right. This bottom tier here, I'm just going to list all the players that we have left, 13 through 16, Dave, and we're each going to pick one to talk about that we
You
find to be
already
most
know where I'm
intriguing.
going.
You know what? I think I do. So here we go. Number 13, Jalen Warren. At 14, we've got Marquise Brown. At 15, Debo Samuel. And then at 16, Javonte Williams. Dave, talk to us about Marquise Brown because I know this is where you're going.
It was where I'm going. I mean, I'm just
Yeah.
rehashing all the same talking points that I had last offseason because nothing changed. I mean, it's still the same team, and we didn't see anything from Marquise Brown last year. He tried to rejoin the team in whatever it was, week 16 or week 17. At that point, the offense had his identity. There wasn't really much room for him. But now with Rashee Rice potentially being suspended, Travis Kelsey clearly over the hill, Xavier Worthy, weirdly enough, avoiding charges after the story we got last week. We'll see if anything else comes of that. But either way, Marquise Brown is just a versatile and talented weapon who could really help this offense in Kansas City be a little bit more explosive than the offense we've seen over the last couple of years. And again, he's just going to be so cheap that I'm willing to take the risk here. The money, though, is concerning. He pretty much got the same contract that the Los Angeles Rams gave to Tutu Atwell. Don't feel great about that, but Marquise Brown, the risk. The risk is that he's the same guy he's been for the last 5 years, injured and shown flashes here and there, but I'm still willing to bet on the upside there. But I can talk about all four of these guys. I know we're running low on time, but I think these are all pretty good signings. I think all four of these players, Jalen Warren, Marquise Brown, Debo Samuel, and Javonte Williams, have elevated their value going into the 2025 season.
Yeah, what I want to say that Javonte Williams has elevated himself. I'm a little gun shy after last year.
Yeah.
I could sit here and say that he didn't get the touches he needed to be a consistent and good running back, but
I think it
this
was more of a
feels
Sean Payton problem.
I think so, but the money is what worries me here. And I know there's the whole injury history. The money of him getting 3 million per year after there is a big 9% cap increase is worrisome
Mm.
because what he got this year was less than what Antonio Gibson got last year, Zach Moss got last year, Austin Eckler got last year. I mean, he's out here making less than guys on rookie contracts, and it is a little bit concerning. Devin Singletary got 5.5 million last year, and Javonte Williams is looking at a $3 million contract. Like, this contract to me just screams. And I hate to say this because I don't feel like players should be treated this way, but it's screams expendable player on the roster. The fact that he's out here basically making the same as Justice Hill, DJ Dallas, Ty Johnson, it's concerning. It's concerning. He's making $1 million more than Daria Gumbawale. Like, I think it's time for us to let the money do the talking here. Unfortunately, with Javonte Williams, I still think he's a great player. He always has been. I don't know if he's able to regain that former self that he had. And
Hey,
I
Rico
think
Dowdle was an RB2 last year, making $1.2 million a year.
But
Say it.
I'd rather have Rico Dowdle back.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
agree.
know that Javonte is the same player he used to be. I think at this point in their careers, Rico Dowdle's better than Javonte. And it still would not surprise me, especially with the depth at running back in this class, if the Cowboys don't go out and get a running back in the first 3 rounds.
Exactly.
It's
And
probably going to happen.
that's the tough part with all of these running backs, like right now. And that's why like all of these guys who I think do get a little bit buzzy that people get excited about right now, I think they're all sells. Jalen Warren,
Yeah.
Javonte Williams, just because like right now, sure, yeah, you start doing projections right now in March, and Jalen Warren is going to have 1,500 yards and a dozen touchdowns. Awesome. But they're going to draft a running back. And the Cowboys are probably going to draft a running back. Now, are they going to go out and get Omari and Hampton or Ashton Jinty in round one, or are they going to bring in a complimentary guy to Javonte Williams in day three? That's really what we need to know. We're just looking at an incomplete puzzle right now, so it's really tough to tell with these running backs. But we have seen that the Cowboys, ever since that mega deal that they gave Zeke a while back, it does seem like they've kind of gotten a little bit sharper on positional value, and they haven't
Yeah.
paid running backs that money. They haven't invested the draft picks in running backs. So they might just be willing to say, we're set at receiver, we're set at quarterback, we got a decent offensive line, we've got our tight end. Let's just throw out whoever we can for cheap in this backfield, like they did last year. And if that's the case, and Javonte Williams gets 200 plus touches, it doesn't matter how inefficient he is, he's going to do just fine in this offense.
I mean, yeah, anyone gets 200 touches. I'm in. I think that what we've done too is we have given so much priority and so much value to. I'm gonna make the comparison like I did earlier with I'm buying a house. I think what we did was we gave so much value to the plot of land at which these houses are being built on, and it's the teams that these players are going to. Chargers and Cowboys, whoever ends up there, man, they're going to be fantasy stars. And we were doing this all for the rookies that we believed were going to get drafted early in round one or round two. And these guys are going to be future fantasy stars. And then we get sort of the middling free agents that end up there. And it's almost like we're trying to convince ourselves, like, this is going to work. This could work. And all of a sudden now these teams don't need to go out and get a rookie running back. They absolutely do. Especially with these contracts, the 1 year deals, the lack of playmaking and explosive ability between the guys. I'm less and less excited about these players. So I think you're right there on, with these running back signings is to sell on these guys as quickly as you can.
I'll point out one situation from last offseason that can kind of paint the picture, though, for the upside for Javonte Williams. J.K. Dobbins signed in Los Angeles, and everybody said, oh, it's a great landing spot, but it's
Mhm.
J.K. Dobbins. He's always been injured. We don't know if he's going to be the guy. And then the Chargers go out in day three and they draft Kamani Vidal, and everyone says, well, now J.K. Dobbins isn't going to do anything at all. And they've got Gus Edwards there as well. J.K. Dobbins was the guy that emerged from that pack and was actually pretty darn good. So even if the Cowboys go out and bring in another cheap veteran and spend a day three pick on a running back, Javonte Williams could still emerge as the guy here. Now, of course, if they go out and they bring in one of these top five running backs, if they bring in an Omari and Hampton or Nash and Jinty or Travion Henderson or Quinshon Judkins or Caleb Johnson, then we simmer the excitement for Javonte Williams. But if they go out and they bring in, a Dylan Sampson or a Taj Brooks or one of these day three guys, Javonte Williams could still be the best guy in that room.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right on that. Like it's the NFL draft is going to still change a lot of things. As much as free agency has changed everything for fantasy and dynasty football, the NFL draft is going to be the big thing that tells us
Oh,
the
I can't
roadmap
wait.
for these teams
I
and
can't
where the
wait.
fantasy values are going to be. Oh, I'm excited. It's
Yeah,
my
all these
Christmas.
half-baked takes right now, talking out of both sides of our mouth. Once the draft is here, then we can start to get a little bit of a clearer picture,
Then we're going to get angrier and louder.
and I'll be
That's what
fully
we do.
baked.
Oh,
Sorry, what?
and that's the best time for us to end the show. That's a sorry Joe at the 50-minute mark. Look at that. Proud of you, Dave. Well, as always, we want to thank you guys for watching and listening all the way through. We're going to be back again next week. We're going to start to have some more guests. We're going to keep talking about rookie content as we get closer to the NFL draft. And as always, Dave and I, we want to thank you guys for watching and listening. We'll see you next time. Adios.